Hi, welcome to our presentation. My name's Bethany Gruskin.
And I'm Catherine Mayato.
My name is Gabriella Tomasic, and we're from the University of New England. Today we'll be talking about practitioners' reflections on the rapid transition to telehealth.
And here's just a quick overview of what we'll be talking about today during our presentation. First, we're going to provide a background on occupational therapy telehealth. Next, we'll be discussing our research questions and methodology. And then we will outline our preliminary findings, as well as include a discussion of implications for further practice. So due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen a rapid shift to telehealth practice for therapy as closings occurred. And so some recent literature has shown that telehealth has been found to be comparable to in-person services. And this includes evaluations, consultations, preventive measures, as well as interventions. Telehealth has also been shown to increase both interprofessional collaboration as well as access to specialized care. And it has also been shown to reduce or prevent delays in care and barriers that cause gaps in services, such as a large distance, weather, illness, and transportation challenges. Telehealth services have also been found to work extremely well within the family-centered framework, which is essential when working with children and youth.
So as a result of the pandemic, rehabilitative therapy practitioners such as occupational therapists, physical therapists, and speech-language therapists, pathologists were thrown into this realm of telehealth, which really limited and made it minimal time to prepare and adjust for the transition into this new way of providing evaluation and therapy. So we had three specific aims that we wanted to address through this study. So one, we wanted to evaluate OT, PT, and speech practitioners' perspectives on the impact of transitioning to telehealth for their children, youth, and their families. Additionally, the intentions were to recognize perceived benefits and barriers to the practice during the transition to telehealth for rehab therapists. And lastly, we hope to reflect on the implications that the transition to telehealth has had on therapeutic and emotional outcomes of the children, youth, and families who receive the services.
So we started by recruiting our participants, and we used a convenient sample of therapists who were known to the University of New England, and then had a snowball effect with therapists passing along and encouraging their colleagues to participate. We followed a two-step classic Delphi method, meaning that we asked very open-ended questions during an initial interview to get a sense of what therapists were experiencing. Then we worked together on a qualitative analysis using inductive reasoning. And through that, we each read the transcripts from those initial interviews individually. And then we met as a group to go through all of the important points together. And we eventually identified 5 major themes. After we had compiled our themes, we conducted follow-up interviews with the majority of our participants.
And here's just a quick demographic overview of our participants. We had 11 participants, 7 occupational therapists, 3 speech language pathologists, and 1 PT. And that led to 10 initial interviews. One of our participants was excluded because she didn't meet our inclusion criteria. And at the time of the initial interviews, 25 to 100% of their services were completely telehealth. And then following that Delphi method that Bethany mentioned, we conducted 9 follow-up interviews. And at the time of those interviews, 0 to 70% of services were telehealth. The practitioners' experiences ranged from 1 to 12 years of practice, and there was a variety of settings that they practiced in, including outpatient, early intervention, home health, as well as school. And here's just a graphical representation of the differences in the amount of telehealth services from that first interview to the second interview.
So these are the 5 themes that we identified after the initial interviews together, and we're going to take you through them all in the next couple slides.
So one of the themes that we found was benefits of telehealth as a whole. So this included improved carryover at home, and strategies to manage behaviors as a result of the parents being or caregivers being more aware of what is happening in therapy sessions. Many of the participants also reported they had greater insight and were able to observe the child at home and their behaviors in their natural environment, which was a big benefit to providing therapy. They also reported that they were able to incorporate and build in to the natural schedule of the child and their natural environment. So they're able to use resources that the child uses every day on a day-to-day basis, which was really beneficial. And it was a reduction of gap in the gap of care. So it reduced missing therapy sessions due to immunocompromised children, a sickness in the family, scheduling, the weather, or just having to travel over long distance. And then participants also stated that they were really motivated by, some participants also stated that the children were really motivated by the technology itself. So that played into their favor, and it allowed for telehealth to be more flexible in scheduling and with the family schedule. And they also had an improved family connection and relationship. So this was one of the quotes that we thought were really highlighted what benefits were for telehealth. So I'm going to read it. Yeah, I think that telehealth has kind of switched my focus a lot and what I do for sessions, especially when seeing kids in their natural environments and using the things that they have in their house. Additionally, conversely, there are barriers to telehealth that practitioners stated. So a common barrier was having the child be engaged throughout the session and being able to attend to the screen for a decent amount of time was really challenging. And also not only creating that buy-in from the child, but also the parent as well, and having to having them be present throughout the session, having to make sure that everybody was on the same page. Technical difficulties did arise. So Wi-Fi, usage of electronics, and figuring that out and finding the right program that fit for both the company and the families made it really difficult to proceed with telehealth. And then also some goals, specifically social and interaction goals, had to be put in the back burner. So because it was just really challenging to facilitate that through telehealth. And then the elimination of hands-on manipulation and being there in person with the child and the family made it really hard to create that rapport, especially when taking on new clients and trying to build that relationship. They found it more difficult. And many participants also stated that they experienced a lot of burnout through telehealth and just having the challenges of high cancellation rates with scheduling and everything. They felt really pressured and stressed throughout the process. So here's another quote that we thought really highlighted what barriers there were for telehealth. So felt thrown into the world of telehealth and you just kind of just have to stumble on and figure out what you're doing.
So with this transition to telehealth, we wanted to focus a little bit on the practitioners, are the implications for practitioners' professional reasoning. Especially at that first interview, we found that there was a steep learning curve that was reported by multiple practitioners to, understanding the procedural and pragmatic manner to deliver services in this format. Telehealth also negatively impacted intervention planning time. Practitioners frequently reported that it took them nearly twice to 5 times as long to plan a single intervention session, especially because they had to completely redesign their already existing plans, as well as facilitate ensuring that the families had the materials that they needed. By the follow-up interviews, several practitioners stated that it did become faster over time and that they were feeling less pressure from that increased amount of time. One way that they addressed these challenges, both the burnout and the steep learning curve, was through collaboration with coworkers and other providers to share resources and things of that nature. Also going back to basics and getting creative with household items, which would be readily available to multiple families facilitated. Again, that decreased planning time and that use of professional reasoning. And then finally, there was a strong shift towards caregiver coaching, meaning that In addition to providing one-on-one services with the child, their professional reasoning was starting to include more of how do I help the parents facilitate this behavior and make it more generalizable. And so a quote that really stood out to us was being able to really provide a lot more of that education and training to parents and help them feel really empowered and confident has been a really great strength of telehealth. And then we talked about their changes to therapeutic use of self, which is how a practitioner, according to Taylor 2008, is how a practitioner intentionally uses their physical and emotional presence to influence progress during a session. Like Gabriella mentioned, there was challenges with building rapport, and practitioners address this by speaking with, when possible, the child's previous therapist. Also trying to be more creative and flexible in the moment. So if a client wasn't able to attend to a specific activity for whatever reason, needing to find a solution quickly while also, maintaining that calm and therapeutic presence was more challenging for many of the practitioners. Additionally, they had to have an increased use of therapeutic use of self with the caregiver compared to a typical in-person session. Caregivers were experiencing their own increased levels of stress and burnout from being at home with their children and working and all of those other factors. And so practitioners were finding that they needed to take a moment during the session to check in with the practitioner and see or check in with the caregiver and see where they were at. These were all things that compounded practitioners' level of stress and burnout. And a lot of them found that, spending increased time organizing and planning really combated that feeling of stress and burnout and helped them feel more in control. However, there was some mixed feelings about that.
So our last major theme that we found was that there were variations in the client's progress. So it all really just depended on the child, whether telehealth was effective or if it wasn't effective for that specific child or family. So it was, like I said, it was really dependent on the child and family, and materials and their environment played a big role in whether the child succeeded or not. Having access to materials and resources and having a parent help to redirect the child in front of the screen or help to set up the computer or whatever device that they were using at the time to really allowed for the child to be able to participate and be engaged and stay motivated. And then also the goals of the family themselves. So whether telehealth was even a priority for the family at the time, or if what goals the family want to prioritize at that moment. A lot of, like I said previously, a lot of the social and interaction goals were put aside. So if that was the main point or the main focus for the child, then maybe therapy wasn't a priority at the time. And then ability to the child to meet the goals. Like I said, caregiver involvement, environment, resources, it all resulted in a mixed progress for whether therapy was beneficial or not.
And then in our second interviews, we gave our practitioners a multiple choice question to ask what their top choice of practice setting would be. And our responses were overwhelmingly 0% of our practitioners said that they would like to practice in a setting that was exclusively telehealth, while 56% of our practitioners said that their top choice would be a hybrid model, incorporating both telehealth and in-person services.
So we really wanted to conceptualize what this would mean for practitioners in the future, especially if a rapid change in delivery of services was indicated again. And so to begin, we thought that really understanding the benefits and barriers of that specific delivery model, and in this case, telehealth, would be really crucial to facilitating that transition and really allow you to plan ahead of time how to address some of those barriers, especially some of the technological hardware, software, Wi-Fi components that make delivering teletherapy potentially more challenging. The second component is that we wanted to focus on how to best support the practitioners in this transition. Many of the practitioners talked about attending CEUs that focused on the legal and monetary implications of providing telehealth, but understanding procedural and pragmatic professional reasoning for how to deliver and how to structure a telehealth session would have been very beneficial to them. In understanding the changes in professional reasoning, the shift towards caregiver coaching, and building into the natural environment were also areas that we felt could be a way to support practitioners. And then finally, fostering and facilitating that interprofessional collaboration, both among all the rehabilitative specialties, but then also within, to make sure that there's a sharing of resources and everything. And then finally, there needs to be as Gabriella talked about, not every child is a good fit for telehealth or a given delivery service model. And so understanding how children might fit into that system, and also how to find alternative solutions for children who don't or wouldn't benefit from telehealth, for example. We recognized that our study had several limitations. We had a small sample size, and that there were differences in timing between that initial interview and the follow-up interview. Along those same lines, the replicability of our study is going to be challenging. This rapid transition to telehealth is taking place at a very specific moment in history. And as we get new information, as we move into the next phase of what service delivery models are going to look like going forwards, that information will help reframe practitioners' experiences. When we initially interviewed many of these practitioners, it was unclear how long they were going to be delivering services. And so as those thoughts and information come to light, it provides a different perspective and a reframing of that experience. And finally, there's limited previous research for us to base our research on, given this unprecedented shift. Finally, where we'd like to see this line of inquiry go in the future is we'd like to see it focus on the lived experience of practitioners, continuing to follow that through the next phase of this pandemic and the stay-at-home orders. And then along those same lines, tracking long-term how these changes to professional reasoning and therapeutic use of self impact both positively and negatively services in the future. So now that practitioners are more confident in that parent coaching, having had to rely on it so heavily during telehealth, that might be a huge benefit in the future, even as we move back to in-person services, but also just monitoring to make sure that that maintains positive and that we're mitigating any negative factors. And from a children and youth perspective, really making sure that there's a qualitative research. There's a lot of quantitative research into outcomes, which really wasn't possible given our study design. If you have any questions, you can feel free to direct them to me at bgruskin@une.edu. It's on the screen for you. Thank you so much for attending our presentation, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Have a great day.